Physical abilities such as strength, speed, agility, endurance, and coordination are fundamental in sports. But mental abilities such as focus, concentration, motivation, confidence, resilience, and decision-making can heavily influence an athlete's performance, especially when it matters the most. If you want the mental edge in sport and life, check out the Max Out Mindset for Volleyball book and workbook or the Max Out Mindset for Softball book and workbook. A guide for coaches, athletes, teams, and parents to help you be in the best position to max out when it matters the most. Go to www.maxoutmindset.com.
You're listening to Max Out Mindset with your host, Dr. Larry Widman, performance psychiatrist and elite mindset coach to women in sports, business, and life.
Welcome to the Max Out Mindset podcast. This is your host, Dr. Larry Widman, my co-host, Coach Jess Connect, volleyball coach, mindset coach. And we always say we do this podcast because we've been blessed over the last couple of decades to work with some of the best athletes, coaches, leaders, and teams in the world, and we love to share what we've learned from them. And then, of course, whenever we have a guest, learn from them as well. I always like to say that my definition of maxing out is given the health, the depth, the talent, the experience, and the intangibles. Can a team or an individual reach the limits of their capabilities? And then can they do it under pressure when it matters the most? Because we always say, if you can't do it when it matters, when it counts, what's the point? Whenever we have a guest on, of course, I like to spend most of our time learning from our guest. And of course, today, which I'm just going to briefly summarize her achievements, we have an Elkhart, Indiana native who is a two-time state champion at Penn High School. She was an All-American at Purdue University. She was the 2019 Best Opposite, named in the FIVB World Cup tournament. She was named the 2019 Best Volleyball Player for USA Volleyball, who she's been a member since 2017. Of course, she was a member of the 2020 Tokyo Olympic team that won gold for the first time in USA history. She was what they call an off-the-bench game changer at that point, although ended up starting the last several games and set a record that year for 97 points and 88 kills that year and led the team in that category. Followed up that wonderfully in 2024 by winning a silver medal in Paris. What's interesting of that, and I think one of her coolest achievements, is she actually broke the all-time record set by Destiny Hooker for the most points ever scored in an Olympic career by a USA volleyball player. Welcome, Annie Drews, to the Max Out Mindset podcast.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, we're really excited to talk to you. I mean, honestly, sometimes like we talk about visualization and how we visualize certain guests being on this thing, but Jess and I have been talking about having you on our podcast for a few years because we've shown so many videos of you that you've taken part of with USA Volleyball or other things that you've done that just articulate your viewpoints on how you think about mindset and team chemistry and role acceptance. And so we feel like we knew you for years, even before you and I crossed paths. So we're really excited to have you. You heard my definition of maxing out. When you think about maxing out as an athlete or a team, what comes to mind?
I mean, I think the obvious answer, you think of just effort, physical effort exerted. Did I do everything I could out there? And, you know, they say like, leave it on the floor. And, I think, what people maybe don't understand, and truthfully, what I didn't really understand until I started looking at some of the mental work, is there's a lot of crumbs left if you're not doing the other side of it, especially as you get, you know, as you start to climb the totem pole of just, opportunities and, you know, the longer I was with national team, the higher the stakes kind of became for me as an individual. I realized just the physical exertion probably wasn't enough anymore. So, yeah, I think there's also the side of like, are you doing everything you can so that when you sleep at night, you can say, I left nothing on this day, to be desired. And so, yeah, maxing out, I think it's not just, you know, physical exertion. It's kind of everything that's going to help you squeeze out just a little bit more when you really need to.
Yeah, I love that answer. And so Jess and I talk about three things with teams. We talk about having no regrets when the season's over, whether you reach your goal or not. And you kind of articulated that. We talk about putting yourself in a position to max out, because we know sometimes you could do everything you said you would do. And sometimes you don't get to start, or you don't get to win the final award, or the internship that you want or whatever. And then, of course, we talk about the most important thing to us, hypothetically, when the season's over. Do you not want to take your jerseys off because you've built such a connection with your team that you're truly sad it's over, whether you need a physical or mental break or not. And so one of my questions for you is, and I mentioned in the introduction, your team won a silver medal. So it did lose the last game, and we'll get into that later. But when you hear those three things, no regrets, put yourself in a position to max out when it matters, and not want to take your jerseys off. When you think about those three goals that we have for every team, do you think USA achieved that in your mind, and did you achieve that this year?
1,000%. It was, and I told you, this is, before we started, I told you this is probably some of the first I've articulated a lot of this. So it might be a little all over the place at times. It might even get a little emotional, but this Olympic quad, we say quad, meaning the 4 years it takes from the last Olympics to this Olympics. In this case, it was 3 years because the Tokyo Olympics were delayed. But this Olympic quad just demanded so much from our team. And I think if people are just tuning into the Olympics, they're, maybe they tuned into the Tokyo Olympics and now they're turning on NBC and watching Paris. They're saying, oh yeah, like this volleyball team won gold. They're defending their gold, right? Like that was probably just the general, message out there. But if you follow the volleyball world, it was just a complete, Cinderella story for us. So a little backstory, our team, while we've been super successful at the Olympics, we've had a very successful program in the world, usually top 3 in the world. And since Tokyo, we have not won a single tournament. We have not been on the podium. And it was this shock and like, what's going on? Is it the staff? Is it time for, younger talent? Do we rely on experience? Just, it felt like anything we did, nothing was really getting us to the results we wanted for like the first time ever. And it was hard. And in a lot of ways, it felt like, I remember we had some friendly scrimmages before the Paris Olympics and they went relatively well, but just, it felt totally different than it did 3 weeks out from the Tokyo Olympics. It felt like we were going to get on the plane with an unfinished product and then just go in front of the world and be like, here's what we got. And truthfully, in some ways you worry, like, are we just going to fail publicly? Because we've been failing somewhat privately for the last few years. And just to see like what our team did, like if you would have, obviously, silver, you fall short, you lose your last match, you don't win a gold. And there's some pain in that. I think being a high achiever, that stings. And losing and then being on the podium, being like, I'm super proud and excited. Like that's a conflicting emotion, right? Like bronze, you finish with a win. Gold, you finish with a win. Silver's this like funny mix of emotions as a competitor. But if someone like 2 months ago would have said like, shake my hand and I'll guarantee you a silver medal, I would have been like, how? Like what, And it's not that we couldn't, it's just all things were trailing towards this probably is not our time like it was 3 years ago. So all that to be said, I think just watching the way our team over the last 2 years, but the last few months specifically, put egos aside and put expectations aside. And not always easily or gracefully or beautifully. Like it's gritty behind closed doors sometimes when you're dealing with emotions and learning you're not going to play and you thought you were, or things like that. But I'm just so proud of the way when we needed to show up, people just put it aside and they were like, I'm going to give everything I have. And I just think carried themselves with like, I would say like a true conviction to being like, I'm going to be my best version of myself. Even if I was a better version 3 weeks ago, like if this is what I have today, I'm going to give that today. So I'm talking in circles now, but just really impressed with each individual because in a way we've never had it before on our team. I feel like I've seen everyone, carry something really heavy the last few years and almost kind of lose their marbles. And then just to watch it come together in the nick of time, it just was really beautiful. And that doesn't happen overnight. I think a lot of that, our experience in Tokyo playing under pressure really helped us down the stretch. But just feel like we 1000% found a way to max out and maybe not get the full job done. We still came home with silver, but I think when I look back on both of my medals, like if I had them hand in hand, like the silver would almost probably feel heavier, like the depth of it, because just what we had to endure to get it is just, it feels so much greater. So.
Yeah, so we love that message because sometimes people only see the final outcome and say you only max out if you get a certain award. And so why we started at the very end, which we don't usually do, I just felt like I wanted you to sort of put a bow around the very end of it so we can go backwards a little bit and learn sort of what it took for you individually to get to that position, because it's an individual thing at first before we can collectively do it as well. And we'll get there, but I wanted to see what kind of thoughts Jess had here and see what kind of questions Jess may have as an intro before we, I think, take a dive into your individual journey and how you got to be where you got.
And Annie, I like the authenticity that you've always been years, whether you're on podium finishes or you're grinding behind the scenes. There's just so much respect for you as an individual athlete, but to be a part of these huge elite level teams, but also elite humans. I don't think we separate you, you're one. And so here's my question for you is, before we dive in, I want to know, there's a lot of rejection, right? And there's a lot of achievement and all in one moment. It could change in a day. It could change in And so you had mentioned a little bit about ego, and ego is a very healthy thing for competitive teams and for achieving that ultimate goal. But there's also a team perspective and a selfish perspective. What is one way that you saw your team execute that really well of, hey, we're going to keep our competitive ego, but we're going to make sure it's team oriented by still being our best, whether we have our role or we don't? How are some key things that you have learned from your team to be successful in that?
It's a great question. I think just compared to the Tokyo Olympic quad, this quad was just so much more volatile with roles, with rosters. I mean, I think if you look at some constants, Justine Wong-Arantes was going to be our libero, was always up there, always traveled. When she was healthy, she was playing a lot. Jordan Thompson and I were almost always traveling. That's a duo that they invested a lot in last Olympics and really put a lot of trust in this Olympics. But beyond that, whether it be injury or new people coming in or Jordan Larson came out of retirement, it felt like every other position was just a bit of a roller coaster in a way that it hadn't been in the past. Like in the past, you'd see some movement, but it wasn't, hey, we're going to world champs with this roster. And a year later, we're going to Olympic qualifier with like a completely different roster. And that's kind of what it felt like, this quad. And so I think just watching everyone release expectation of what it's supposed to look like. And I don't even know if I can articulate like how to do that. But I think it kind of goes back to like some of what we were saying, like, I'm going to carry myself in a way that like I am going to sleep at night, like, because I know I did everything I could. And if it's not me, the people in front of me are going to know I'm on their tails. Like I am that close to where they really better be dialed because I'm ready to take it, and not just take it, but snipe it. Like I want to take it and run with it. And so I think just it created, we've always had a really competitive environment in our gym because, like you said, things can change day to day, week to week. But I think just having everyone hold roles so loosely in a way that in the past maybe some people had a little more security was really important for our team. And also just like the time leading up to the Paris Olympics, it felt like all quad. We hadn't upset anyone. We were always the ones being upset. And on paper, you're like, wow, this is like not much of a resume. But, when you're there, when you watch the film back, we're like, we are so close to, like winning that one. And if we win that one, we advance, and that's a better matchup. And then who knows, maybe we're on the podium. Like, it's been years of these, like, what could have beens. And like, you don't want to dwell in it, but you're also like, it's not like we're out here getting like spanked and going home with our tail between our legs. Like, we are so close. And some of that roster and starting like volatile, like those changes, you can also kind of say, hey, like once we get a healthy group that can work together and start, moving in one direction, maybe we'll have those 3 or 4 points. So I think that's part of it too, is being in it and knowing you're really not that far off kind of gives your ego also this like really practical side where it's like, okay, it's not like I'm, getting on this plane thinking we're going to win gold even though we haven't won anything. It's like, gosh, like we are really close and all it takes is inches. And so I think that kind of keeps everybody a little bit more engaged.
Mm-hmm. A lot of key things. And I think hearing from you, right, a lot of our listeners, athletes, coaches, and everyone else can really pick up on some things. One, you stayed consistent and never giving up. And you talked about maxing out from the very beginning, but you also talked about, I am going to be so competitive that I'm going to have 0 regrets by the time I call the end of the day. And I know if that's my best, then someone's got to beat my best in order to earn that role or that spot, or even maybe being part of that travel team. So those are some key things I heard, but it's an authentic culture that's willing to adapt and change and control what they can. And you have to individually fight for that. And collectively, we have to protect that. And that's what I heard. So, Doc, what are some of your thoughts? She's spitting fire.
Yeah. Well, I mentioned, a successful high school and college career. I'm curious as we start to hone in onto this national career, what point did you realize, Annie, that you were good at this thing, that maybe good enough to play on a national stage, on a world stage? When did you figure that out?
Mm-hmm. It was pretty slowly. I had a solid career at Purdue, but I was never like the outright best. I was never like Big Ten Player of the Year or, anything like that, but I was good enough to go pro. And then once I was pro, I had, played with some people who I'd met Karch before, talked with him before, but just kind of briefly, like, kept a small connection there. I'm sure he keeps in touch with a lot of people who might be deemed on the radar. And then when I was playing, it was my second season abroad. I was playing in Puerto Rico, and it was after the Rio Olympics. So this was 2017. And typically the year after the Olympics, they will bring in like a new influx of people and kind of just give a lot of people a shot. And then as we get closer to the Olympics, we bring in less and less new people. So I'd had this like prior connection with Karch. We talked some, and I was playing with Paige Tapp. She was a Golden Gopher, Minnesota. She was playing in Puerto Rico on a different team, and she was like, yeah, I'm going out to Anaheim. Like, we're going to, I want to give this a shot. Like, my dream would be to be on the national team. And truthfully, no one from Purdue had really done that. I think also social media was just in a different time. I feel like I just didn't know a whole lot about what that process looked like, or even what playing abroad looked like. She just encouraged me. She's like, you should reach out. I think you should be invited. Like, you should go. But you got to kind of put your name in the ring in a sense and show them you want to be there. So I talked with Karch and got a tryout. And I was there for, 2 weeks, and then had a sit down of like, we actually really could see you a part of this. And so I guess that was, like my first summer with the national team in 2017 was when I at least was given the chance. But to be honest, I don't even think I really believed in myself until probably, I would say, like 2 years after that. There was a defining moment. I've talked about this before on different platforms, but I had come back from an overseas season. I was playing in Turkey, had a good season, but it was a really hard experience. And I was kind of in this moment of like, gosh, like, is this really worth it? Because this is like really not fun all the time. And had a really hard meeting with Karch, like right when I got back. And he was like, you are a great person, a great teammate, a great player. But as we get closer to the Olympics next summer, like we don't know if it's you. And we need to start giving other people chances. And it was really hard. And he wasn't saying I didn't have a chance. He was just saying the picture's kind of changing and you may or may not be in it. And I think there was a moment where I was like, it's go time a bit, like now or never. And I think going off of that, like just gave me this like fire that I was like, something has to change. And it was like kind of the first time I had seen myself play in that space with true conviction of like, I'm just going to be me. And if it's enough, it's enough. But I think it was kind of forced out of me, like to really believe that I could do this, and had a big summer and kind of earned my way from there. But yeah, it's funny. I don't know if I ever had like one moment where I was like, I believe I can do it and I'm going to do it. It was kind of like, all right, it's not you. And then I was like, wait, I want to do it. So
I love that.
sometimes it's forced out of you a little bit.
What's interesting is I'd mentioned earlier you were named the USA Volleyball Player of the Year in 19, and you were named Best Opposite by FIVB. But then one of the videos that we showed, and of course I know your history a little bit as well, was at a time where right before the Tokyo Olympics, you had said in a video we've been showing that you thought you were going to have a pretty stable role. Like you actually thought you were going to be the starter.
Yep.
And then you found out, I don't know if it was just a week or two or a month before, that it wasn't going to be you. Can you share a little bit about that process with us when you went from Karch now saying to you, I don't know if it's going to be you, and you go, wait a minute, it's going to be me. And then you earn the right to be the starter in your mind, and you had been starting, thought you were going to be named the starter in Tokyo, and then you find out relatively in a short period of time before the Olympics, Jordan Thompson's the starter and you're the backup. Can you take us through your emotions and what you went through there and how you navigated it?
Yeah, that was honestly, like when I look back at my career as a whole, like that was one of the biggest lessons that like I'm so glad I learned. And it was so hard. And I remember there's an interview, I think, from the Olympics that you're probably referencing in some ways, where I talk about being a game changer and it's not the role you want, but you got to rock the role you have. And kind of went like viral for a minute in the volleyball world. And everyone's like, oh, like what a great teammate and stuff. And I felt like such a fraud because behind closed doors, it was like so agonizing. Because I had a lot of conversations and just like history had kind of shown that it likely just based off of experience alone was going to be me. And Jordan Thompson was just a house on fire. Like she was just in her moment. And so one thing people don't realize is for major tournaments, the staff has had us cast a vote of who we think should be starting. And I'm not even sure I voted for myself. I probably did. The ego was like going through internal warfare. But it was like I remember having a moment of like being like, I might not even vote for myself because like you just can't deny it. Like her statistically, like she was just having this awesome pre-Olympic tournament. And I think what was just hard was it was kind of the first time I'd ever been a role player. I was really used to being out there. And I'd never played for like a national championship team in college. I'd never played for like a top level Champions League team in Europe. Like I'd always kind of played on really competitive teams, or like mid to upper level pro teams, but like had always started. And so I just was this whole new flood of emotions, like in a really vulnerable time. But I think it taught me a lot about just how selfless this role is for a lot of teammates I've had in the past. Like, it's like, wow, I have a lot of people who I love who've been in this and have done it really well. And it just went right over my head because I was so focused on myself. So that was like a big learning lesson. And then there is like a motivation to it, right? Like you want, like when your number's called, ideally when, you know, just when things are, it looks like we might not win a set, they'll put in some new people. You know, you never are thinking like you want someone to play bad or you want like injury, like that is never a thought. But it's like when they need you, even if it's for 2 or 3 points, you're like, I'm going to show them like it should be me, you know? And so I think there's that like motivation as well. And that's something that I think I would encourage a lot of teams, or a lot of young athletes to kind of develop is like, you're not the only one in that position. In volleyball, there's at least 5 other people who are also in that position where their job is to just stay ready. And it's a really selfless, hard thing. And so band together and, you know, make a practice plan of like how you're going to kick their butt or just really be the safety net. So when one person's really deep in their feels one day, the other 4 or 5 can pick them up. And then tomorrow it'll probably shift who's struggling. But there were just so many lessons to learn. And I mean, I've said this before, and I've even said this to Jordan Thompson, my like opposite counterpart. Like, I didn't do it well all the time. You know, I think a lot of my teammates can attest to that for themselves in that position as well. It's like, it's hard to process something publicly and to watch your dream start to take form in a way you didn't picture it. So it wasn't pretty or it wasn't natural. But I think I was able to at least like conceptualize it in the nick of time. And it gave me a perspective that looking back at my career, I'm just really glad that I have.
I love that because it is the hardest thing for most elite athletes to navigate at all levels for Jess and I. And so before we go into this next piece about how you wanted to become the starter again and the things that maybe you had to do a little bit different physically and mentally, Jess, what are your thoughts?
I'm just so thankful that you can talk about that because most don't hear that. And most, you know, just hurry up, get over it, get ready. You could go in, just deal with it. Right. And I think we forget there's strategies, there's people that you need, there's teammates to go be that role player, but to also be the teammate behind the role players. And so if you don't mind, in your darkest days, right, or in your darkest moments, when you feel defeat, what is one strategy or how did you get through just that passing moment? Because it passed and you've had moments that you've overcome, but in that darkest one, was there a strategy or something that you learned that helped you?
I think it's less of like an individual thing, but more of like a culture thing. But I would encourage teams and coaches. I mean, a lot of it's about how you frame it. And if you look at it like, oh, I'm not a starter, like, you know, everyone's eyes are over there. I can kind of, you know, woe is me. I could do what I want. Like no one cares kind of thing. Like that's like a miserable way to not just play, but to live your life. And so culturally, I would really love to see teams and coaches, which I thought, especially as girls, we did a really, really good job of just being like, here's your strengths. Like, here's why we would choose you. And also like, here's the inches why we did it, you know, and have those conversations around like, all right, if I go in, like what is so important that my teammates see, you know, and what is going to just even the margins. And also I think as coaches, we kind of embodied this like game changer thing. And some people cringe. I know Lauren Carolini's like, I hate it, cut it. Like, you know, but I'm like, you know, different strokes for different folks. But I think what I liked was this idea of like, if I come in, it's to change the course of the game. It's to show something that I saw that maybe they couldn't see while they were in it. It's to raise the energy. It's to bring some laughter. Like it's to do something different. And also as coaches, like I think so much can be kind of cushioned if you're like, hey, it's not you, but here's what we see in you. And here's what you do bring. And here's what I need from you on that other side. You know, like give them a role besides just non-starter. And people, that's all I think we really want on a team is we want to feel like we're a part of it and like we're all contributing something. And honestly, when you're not a starter, that is probably more important to feel like you're contributing something. Because like those margins, like when you do get to come in and you serve them out of system, like that's huge in your mind for the next like few days, you know? Whereas if you're serving all the time, you know, it's like you probably don't even remember every serve. So just I think strategy wise, it's more about getting external and fostering an environment that encourages people to get external so people feel like they're still involved and have a role.
Value and purpose. And role clarity isn't easy.
Yeah.
Just communicating from coach to athlete, athlete to athlete, athlete back to coach. So not great things.
One of the things before we wrap up the 2020 kind of experience was that we had Jordan Thompson on our podcast a couple of years ago, but we show a clip of hers where she talks about if she's not the starter today, that's okay, because that means she's not supposed to be. And she gave this example that I just think has resonated both ways, because this time, you know, it's gone back and forth with you, but she said, when you came in for her after she got hurt and then you stayed in and played the last several games at a high level when they won gold, she said, there was a time where I told Annie, they're taking line, cross is open. And when she hit cross and got a point, she got all excited like a little kid and goes, that's kind of me. Helped her with that. And to us, we've seen that really be important for great teams who have a lot of depth, who, like you said, what's your value? Well, her value in that moment, she didn't get a point on the scoreboard, but in her mind, because she saw something on the court and said, hey, they're taking this, that's open. And when you went there, she says, that's kind of me too. We just think that's the coolest thing at the highest level or in high school, to be able to go, how did I contribute to my team? Whether I scored a point or not. And I wanted to share that because you've been mentioning the same thing, and that was your role for a while. You got to have the storybook ending in Tokyo where you were one of the stars on the team and never came out, because when you were asked to come deliver you played so well, they kept you rolling for the whole thing, right? So here's what I'm curious about. You left that quad, in my mind, with a ton of confidence. Now, you weren't named the original starter, but you ended up the starter for a variety of reasons. But jump ahead a few years, and you're getting ready to navigate this next quad, going to Paris, and there were some things in your mind that you had decided that maybe you had to get better at if you wanted to actually be named the starter from the beginning, rather than being known as the off-the-bench game changer, which we happen to love that phrase, game changer, too. So it's unique. But can you talk a little bit about that? I know we're jumping ahead a few years, but I mean, how do you go from being one of the stars of the Olympic team, even though you ended up not being the original starter, to trying to figure out, where does my confidence come from? Or, you know, what do I need to do differently to be named the starter from the beginning this time in a very competitive gym? Can you talk a little bit about your mindset and sort of how you navigated that?
If I'm going to talk about it, I think like it's really mostly this last year. I think 2022 and 2023, we had some injury. We had a lot of just things go on in people's personal lives, and everyone also kind of takes more rest after the Olympics. So I don't want to like write off 2022 or 2023, but it felt like it was more, like I mentioned earlier, just we were like playing poker with half a deck of cards a lot of the time. So this summer, it felt like the first summer where it's like, all right, whether they're healthy or not, like everyone is doing everything they can to be ready by July 26th. Like, so assuming everyone's healthy, everyone's in it, everyone's like ready to rock and eligible, like who are we going to put out there? So I guess I preface that because I think this year was where I felt like the most work was done with like who I want to be and what I want it to look like. And it's not to say I wasn't, we didn't have that before. It looked really different. But I think, gosh, I'm like all over the place with this. I guess One thing, so I sat down this spring with Jordan Larson, teammate, friend of mine, and obviously a really high volleyball mind and IQ. And she kind of said, I think it totally could be you. Like, I feel like you could be our it girl. You could be a big piece for us. Um, but I get a small sense that you're like getting in your own way. And I was like, okay, like, what do you mean? Can you elaborate? And we started talking, and I think it kind of opened this can of worms for me that I realized I really did kind of need to address. And it kind of came from, I think I had gotten so fixated on being a good non-starter that I almost in some ways was counting myself out as the starter the last few years, which is funny because I was starting a lot of the time the last couple of years. It was very 50-50, almost felt like flip a coin to them. And that's not, I think it's more like our team is blessed to have two opposites who could start, but sometimes it made it both of us, Jordan Thompson and I both feel like, well, it doesn't matter. It could be you, it could be me. Like, what makes me special over you, or vice versa. So at that part, it was kind of hard, but it was so up and down. And I think it was just easier on my ego to put myself in the non-starter box. And then if it was me, I'd be pleasantly surprised. Versus going and like grabbing it and playing in a way that makes it hard for them to keep me off the floor, to where like maybe even statistics aren't as relevant anymore. And Karch Karai, our coach, he's a pretty statistical guy. Like, he's very logical. And so I'm like, that's also kind of scary to play that way, because like I could do everything. It could be this big, like, beaming smile and aura, but like if it comes down to statistics, maybe I still won't win. And that's like a vulnerable place to be. So, but anyway, I think I got so fixated on being the best non-starter that I kind of stopped believing in myself as the starter. And Jordan had recommended candidly reaching out to you, Larry, and just talking through some of this max out mindset stuff. And I think when we started talking, it gave me this space to like dump my ugly thoughts to someone who wasn't fully involved, like wasn't involved at all. But had followed our journey. So it's like, okay, any teammate, they're going through their own stuff. My husband, amazing supporter, but okay, he's biased, like he's got skin in the game. My family, same thing. So it was like, here's a place where you can really just like dump it. And then I think what you realized was we've got this small runway, like we've got 3 months. So instead of trying to like reinvent the wheel, like, let's just reframe a lot of this, what's already going on in your mind and your heart. And I think this last year has been looking at and confiding actually in some teammates of like, what makes me, like, when I'm my best, like, what makes you want to have me on the floor, and asking them. And that's kind of scary because I'm like, gosh, like, what if they say nothing? Like, there's just that scary kind of vulnerability to it. But just identifying what that looks like to my team. And one thing that they've said is you're consistent. And I know they don't mean statistically. It's like, I'd love to think I'm statistically consistent, but that just hasn't been the case the last few years. But they're like, we know how hard you're going to work and we can play around you. Like, we know what you will and won't take. It's not like she's here one day and she's lights out. The next day she's, thinking about her vacation time. It's like, no, like, we know what you're going to get, or what you're going to give and what we're going to get. And so that was like, okay, how do we capitalize on that? And how do we, in moments where it looks like it is you or it isn't you, how can we just play in a way that like you're so enamored with the things you want to be and the things that you're good at that like it doesn't matter what side you're on or what the score is. And I think that's where I started to feel a lot of freedom, and saw it kind of start to translate, and just like stop making it about the politics of it or about the way to protect your ego, and more just be like, here's what's defined that you're really good at and that you bring, and how do we just work on trying to bring that in every moment of every day.
Before we get into that specific strategy, what I call our second scorecard, and not getting caught up in an individual drill or a statistic for that day or that week, or how I played versus the person trying to beat me out that day. I'm really curious. I mean, what Jess has to say. You keep mentioning vulnerability, and that's a favorite topic of ours. But Jess, what are your thoughts as you listen to her start to share her willingness to be vulnerable and say, I got to talk to my teammates. I'm going to listen to what Jordan Larson has to say. I'm going to reach out to a stranger and see if I can figure out just an inch here or an inch there to give me this runway to maybe, like she said, go from somebody who's been great off the bench, but I'm going to take my spot back.
The role you've always wanted, right? And the outcome and the dream that you've always wanted, you had it. And I'm thankful that Jordan was a safe place for you to process that with. And if you can take us back to that moment, whether it was at a coffee shop or restaurant, not sure. And she shared that news of, hey, Annie, I think you get in your own way. One, were you offended right away? And two, what was that realization of like, you're right?
Mm.
How did you process that in that moment? Because we're achievers, we're perfectionists, right? And when someone calls us on something, it's a little surprising.
Mm-hmm.
In that moment.
Oh, that's funny. Jordan and I are friends. We've hung out socially outside of the gym, but she was like, do you want to get coffee? And it's, like when you can tell someone has an agenda, and I'm like, oh gosh, like what I do. And so I'm just, shaking in my boots a bit because Jordan's just one of those people who's not afraid to shoot people straight. And so in some ways I was kind of relieved. I was like, oh, this isn't that bad, but it did open this can of worms of a lot. And I think I remember sitting there feeling like, do I want to just take this? Or like, I could feel like my chest getting tight and being like, not to fight back, but be like, yeah, okay, maybe I'll see I'll talk with someone, or maybe I'll open up, or being like, do I just not? Like, this is all said and done in 3 months. Like, do I just hold it in and fight through the way I've been fighting? And because that would be more convenient, right? Like, just to be like, no, I'm good, and state my case as to why I think nothing's dwelling. But then I kind of got emotional. I was just like, I'm exhausted, and I don't think it really I don't think I could articulate it very well until Leary and I started meeting more on like what actually is like depleting me emotionally, and preventing me from being my best, and kind of making me hold back a little. But grateful that she had the confidence and ability to see it and call it out. And I think a big thing that kind of started that journey for me was there were two things. One, she gave this image of like, picture like a wet rag, and like we're trying to just wring out like everything we have. Like, so when you come home and drop your bags in August and sit on your couch, like this should be bone dry, And I was like, for someone who, and she said it, like my teammates have said, like for someone who works 100%, 110%, like physically, I felt like, my mental game was probably sitting around like a D plus. Like it just was like this untapped thing that I just didn't really look into. And so, all right, for the sake of wringing out that sponge or that rag, let's really say we did everything we could. And then the other piece was, I think as a teammate, if my teammate is pointing this out and says, this is something I think would help you in our team, that alone is worth, exploring. If you want to win at a high level, it's one of those things, like once it's in the air, you can't really like pretend it never happened or ignore it. It's like, out of respect for my teammates, if she's seeing and feeling this, odds are other people are too. And now we've spoken it, like it's in the air. And so let's at least take a look. And so yeah, I think grateful. And it was hot, like a kind of a hard realization, because I was like, gosh, this is going to take a lot of emotional energy that I don't know if I have. Mm-hmm. But I think that's the thing about doing really hard things like the Olympics, is a lot of times you're faced with two hard decisions. It's not like there's a right and a wrong or an easy and, challenge yourself. It's like they're both hard. Like no matter what you're driving in the stress lane, you just got to pick which lane you're going to in. So yeah, a lot was sparked up from that conversation.
Doc's going to laugh because I do this a lot. So you're saying at such a high level, they're two hard decisions. Like there's no easy route.
A lot of times, no. Wouldn't that be great?
For our listeners and a lot of the athletes that we serve and coaches. So you're saying to be able to do hard things, you had to find tools to help you handle hard better.
One thing that plays in my head a lot is like, do the right thing even when it burns. And I think the older you get, more experienced you get in like this kind of space of seeking something really hard. You just have to really trust your conviction. But either way, it's like, all right, do I go on harboring this disbelief and lack of confidence and, put myself in the small box, which is, torturing a lot of days? Or do I just face it, which is also hard? And that could get ugly and it could backfire. And maybe I just, lose my rocker right before the Olympics. But it's like, what are you going to do? And I think my conviction was like, bring out the towel,
I mean, you have an opportunity, the pain of regret, not going after it, or you do it and watch what happens. I think it's faith versus fear. It's, do I want to be a victim or a victor? And I love that you're very honest and you're vulnerable in that moment. And it also, for us to know, you were in great relationship outside the court or outside of training. And that is a very key thing for high level teams, is work on building those right relationships for moments like yours at that coffee shop. You knew your number was called. Jordan's calling you up. You're having this coffee. And I think that paid off for you because ultimately you had the power of a choice of what you're going to do with it. And so, Doc, I think, hearing more of what Annie's saying and that vulnerability, it really is a strength of hers, and you had to tap into it, and it paid off for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
What's interesting, I mean, we spent 10 minutes introducing her with accolades. Right? I mean, one of the best in the world, right? One of the best in the world. And she said at times I had a D+ mentality. And it just tells you, how many people struggle with that. And can still achieve a lot, but then to get that next inch or two. And so, obviously, when I was in Paris and watching you guys, I had asked you sort of after Brazil if I could share sort of a little bit about a couple strategies you came up with to really help identify your second scorecard so that you didn't get caught up in things you couldn't control, whether it be politics or practice or whatever, and go. And so what's really resonated with teams and individual athletes, especially because we talk a lot about team values, but in this case, you came up with a couple that were just your own. And you came up with two. One was a phrase, play big, and one was fearless. And I define those, I call them a second scorecard. And if you could understand what play big and fearless meant to you and why you picked them, those are things you could look back at after every drill, after every practice, every match, and say, how did I live those? And if I did those at a high level, I can live with the outcome, whether I'm starting, not starting, played my best, not played my best. And one example I give teams, and just on that, is that, you could have the best hitting day of your life technically, and then you're playing a team with Justine on it, and she's just digging your balls. And like, technically and process-wise, you crushed it, but you hit 100. And then there's other days where, you get kind of lucky and you whiff on a couple balls and they act like a tip when you were trying to crush it, or it hits the tape and drops. And you're like, half my balls I didn't even swing right, but some of them went down that shouldn't have. And so sometimes you hit better and we didn't really deserve it. And other days we're like, dang, I've never really swung better, but I just wasn't. And to be able to go back to, did I play big and fearless? Can we attack each one of those real with our audience and say, how did you come up with those two? And then I'll help remind you if you don't remember completely what I understood they meant to you. I read from you first, but let's start with play big first, because you came up with those on your own. And said, those are going to define me from now on. First, I got to prepare well and play well, and stats do matter to some degree, obviously.
Yeah.
But Can you tell us what play big meant to you and why you picked that? Why was that so important as something that maybe had gotten in your way in your mind in the past from being named the starter?
I think part of it was what my teammates identified in my strengths. Like when you're your best, you just are going for it. Like you are just like unfazed, fearless, big, but the opposite of that big. When you're not, we can see the wheels turning. We can see you swinging hard, but maybe not with the range or not with not with the riskiness. And so I think, part of that was kind of what my team defined as what I looked like at my best. Part of it was what our team needed. And we run a pretty balanced offense. But we need someone just ripping the ball. And that's not going to be everyone's words. Like Jordan Larson, Kelsey Robinson, like those probably aren't their words. Like they are ball control, keep it in, low error. Like they have a completely different role. So I think that's part of it too, is like, this is what the team needs from whoever's out there in my position. This is what they've defined as things that I can do when I'm my best. And then just things that were simple enough that like when I felt myself get small, I could just say them really quickly in my head. Like just they were quick cues that I could fall back on. So just playing big to me feels like chin high, chest out, kind of like I don't give a crap in a way. And I think that's also part of, kind of going back to like it's me and JT flip a coin at times, is like if it's me, like I'm out there to rip at balls. And if it's not my night, like here's this other Olympic gold medal opposite who can come in and do it, or vice versa. So there's kind of that like comfort to it. Is like, this only breaks down when I'm out there being timid. That's the only way this doesn't end well for our position. Or if JT's out there and being timid. So to me, it was like, play with your chest out, play with your chin high. And then, that I guess kind of goes in with fearless. I think a big thing that I've had to kind of come to terms with is if you follow international volleyball, some of the best players in the world, maybe in the history of volleyball, are opposites. Mm-hmm. You have Paula Egonu, you have Tiana Boscovich, Isabel Hawk, like Melissa Vargas. Mm-hmm. And I think for a long time in my head, my parameter was like, I am not them. Like I was like, oh, like I'm really good, but there's always going to be some voice in the crowd or in the comments or something telling me I'm not them, and we won't win if we don't have something like that. And I think I kind of had to come to terms with that. Like, okay, that's not me. And I wish it was sometimes. Like that would be cool. But I've been really good when it matters. Just when I'm in like out of my own way. And I don't need to be the best opposite in the world, but can I be the best opposite in this gym for an hour and a half? Or can I be the best attacker even on this side for an hour and a half, And you can't, like for me and my physical ability, I can't do that unless I'm fearless. Like I don't have the physical makeup to do that just like naturally alone. Physically, I have to be fearless. So part of it is, excuse my language, is you have to walk in like you're the baddest bitch in there. And maybe you are, maybe you're not, but you never know if you will be unless you think about it that way. So that's kind of where big and fearless came from for me.
So a couple things for our audience. What I remember hearing about that too is that play big involved what you said, body language, chin up, chest out, shoulders back. It involved you making sure you were communicating at a high level between every point with your team instead of getting quiet. Mm-hmm. I remember you mentioning that eye contact is a strength of yours, and sometimes that wouldn't be quite as good if you were under stress. Mm-hmm. What I thought was interesting is your choice to sort of smile as much as you did between every point. Sometimes when it wasn't your best point, because it was what your team needed, and maybe even what you needed to be external. So I saw those as your play big ingredients: body language, eye contact, communication, and smiling. Controllables that aren't always easy under stress. And then that tied into you being able to be fearless, meaning what you had said was there were times maybe when things weren't going my way, I would shrink a little bit and maybe not take the same risk that I need to take. This other piece to being fearless, so I think is so important to Jess and I and to teams that we work with, which is we can have a teammate. Now, you mentioned Jordan pointing out some things, but remember we had a discussion about who on your team would be best able to help you if there was moments in time in the Olympics when you felt a little fear or weren't being as fearless as you wanted to be. And you quickly pointed out Justine Wong-Arantes as a person who was good at that for you, but you weren't necessarily 100% confident that she knew that. Did you have a conversation with her, or did you let her know the importance that she played for you? Or how was she able to navigate that for you in moments that maybe you couldn't do it for yourself?
Yeah, I think the time we met, and I mentioned Justine, I think the thing about teams is there's so many factors, and Justine is like calm, cool, collective. We're not even like super close outside the court. Like we get along great, but we kind of run in different circles, or we have our own people on the team, but just I think she embodied a lot of what I don't. Just being so that calm, cool, collective. And then I think also, she loves feeding off of energy. And so if smile and laughter and fun and yelling and like, if that's what comes natural to me, like she can feed off of that as well. But I think what's cool about teams is it really kind of evolves as you go. I don't know if we ever had that conversation. I think we've had, like a handhold going into a match or two where it's like, I'm going to look to you if I need it, But I think throughout the Olympics, Lauren Carlini became a big one for me. She was my roommate and just someone who we tend to be on the same wavelength with like structure or like just, I don't know what, like how we see things happen. It's like I can say something and Lauren like already knows what I'm thinking and vice versa when it comes to volleyball. And she's been a great friend. And another one was Chiaka Ogbogu. And I think that was more from the spiritual side. Chiaka and I are both believers. And I at times struggled to stay as confident as I wanted to be and we needed me to be. She had a completely different set of cards. She struggles with some physical stuff. Like she'll cramp a lot in games. And we would like pray for each other before matches and just like denounce getting small and denounce cramping and like just just like saying like we're not gonna give that a seed of thought today. And I think that's the other, a lot of people with their faith, that's a way to play free. Like that's what Christianity is. It's seeking freedom and finding freedom through Jesus. And but that's not a box that, everyone on my team is going to check for me. So I think that's what's kind of cool is it kind of takes on different forms and you can have a few people who you can turn to for maybe different reasons. And maybe one day you need the hand hug from Justine. Maybe one day you need some prayer with Chiaka. It's like, I thought we did a good job of kind of finding that rhythm naturally, this summer as the tournament went on.
We talk about that being our third ingredient of confidence.
Yeah.
Can either help you or hurt you. They can do it in different ways. And then our sixth ingredient, which sometimes is higher, it can be spirituality, which you brought up. Jess, do you have any follow-up questions in this area of confidence or other things that you heard from her with her second scorecard?
Is training confidence easier or harder to do at such a high level that you're performing at? Was that always easy for you?
I think it's harder. I just think it never gets easy. I think there's the illusion that it, what you get to a point and you figure it all out. And I remember having this kind of epiphany moment to Larry once in July, and then he showed a clip of me saying almost the same thing verbatim, but in an interview before the Tokyo Olympics. And so I was like, oh, so I had it figured out then. And then I lost it somewhere, and now I have it figured out again. So I think it's a journey. And I think it's when you're trying to be confident, it shows you care about something. If you didn't, you would just retreat to what feels natural to you. But yeah, it definitely isn't easy in a high performing space or even as like a high performance person, because you're always just going to look at the inches you fall short. But there's a lot of good work to be done in just defining what that means to you and what that feels like to you, and how that fits into like a team space as well.
I know that there's 6 ingredients to confidence that Doc and I teach, and one of the, number 6 is spiritual, and that's something that you leaned really heavy on, as you just shared, prior. My next question would be is, for you, how did you learn to express when you needed help, whether on court or just maybe being a teammate, and what you needed maybe pregame or during in match? But I think learning how to ask for help in the way that you needed it is not always easy for our athletes and coaches. How did you learn to do that so well towards the end of your career with the national team and then going into pro in the US?
Yeah, I don't know if there's like if it's super easy. It still kind of feels like you're going out on a limb when you're kind of, again, being vulnerable with someone who maybe didn't ask you to be. You're just like, I am scrambled eggs right now. I need something. But we have a team consultant, Sue Enquist, who really just encouraged us to with check-ins, be like, where are we at today? And we would do like anonymous polls, and someone would say, I'm feeling great, 2 thumbs up, let's rock. Someone else would be like, pretty down, tough week. And we don't know who said what, but it just goes to show like everyone's experience is so different, and let's have grace for just because I'm feeling one way doesn't mean that's how everybody's feeling one day. And so I think she's kind of encouraged that, like, it's okay to state it and it's okay to ask for help. And I think knowing where to ask is important. And, a lot of teams have resources for that, off the court and on the court. But I think just really take some time and look at like who on your team could like be what you need. And to be honest, like I have benefited so much from playing with Jordan Larson, but she's a tough cookie. Like, I am not going to go to her and be like, I'm having a really tough day emotionally. Like, will you hold my hand? Or like, will you smile at me out there? Like, that's not her. Like, that's asking her to do something that's not in her comfort zone. And I'm like, just as no one's telling me to, shut up and stop smiling, I'm not going to ask her to do that. Like, we want people focused on the task at hand, not like emotions we're dancing around. So you kind of look at it and it's like, all right, who's someone on the court who could carry that with me if I need it? And who's someone off the court? Like, if everyone on the court is just up to their earlobes, like, who's someone off the court that can do that? So take some time to really like evaluate that and who those people might be for you, and then have a conversation with them about like, hey, you're someone who I love and trust for this reason or that reason. And then can you be a resource for me if I'm out there and I need it? And most times I think people are probably going to say yes. So, but definitely worth front loading it, just so it's easier for you in the moment. And, no one's caught with big eyes or anything like that.
Vulnerability is key in communication and connection. In order in the big moments, it takes time to work on. As you said, front load it is that process. And it's so unique. Everybody has their own gift, and to celebrate that. I have one last question for her, Doc, but Annie, is it easy to celebrate yourself or hard? And like, has that been a journey for you? Because I think so many times being as competitive and elite as you are, we're always wanting to get better. And sometimes we need to celebrate what we do well in the moment.
I think for most of my career, it's been pretty hard. I think now, like, it's no secret. Like, my time with national team is pretty much behind me. I don't intend to go for LA. So I think this last year took on this kind of like different, like, you have to enjoy it a bit more, like let yourself enjoy it. And that's hard because you've done something one way for a long time. And part of, I think, what makes us so good at what we do is we do hold some pretty impossible standards at times. And We're hard on ourselves, but I think it's gotten easier as I've edged closer to the end of my career. Just because, I mean, part of bringing out that towel is, you don't want to have regret of, gosh, like I didn't even breathe for 3 years, like this is your life, this is your calling. You want to be excited about it and lean into it. So definitely gotten easier, a little bit, but I think in general, it's a blessing and a curse. Like, I remember when we won silver, we were already in the locker room making like little jokes about like gold looked pretty nice, like, but that's just part of it. Like, you don't get to a really high achieving point unless you're pretty hard on yourself. But you just gotta have fun with it too. I remember Dana Retke, she takes a lot of extra reps, and I was gonna take some extra reps one day too. And we started talking, and I told her, I was like, you know what, Dana? I told myself this summer, I'm only allowed to take extra reps if I'm nice to myself. The minute we start getting like mean, like you can be like corrective, but the minute we start being like, what was that? Come on. Like 2 years ago, you could have made that, like the minute you start doing that, we shut it down. Like you can't, there's a cost sometimes that's too high. So, extra reps were only for if we were going to be nice to ourselves. So, yeah, long-winded answer, but it's hard, but it's probably also what's helped get me this far.
No, we needed to hear that answer. Right? The credibility goes back to you, and you're right. It's at what cost? At what cost? Or we can do things, but once it starts to get negative mentally and we start comparing, right? There's a cost there. And so there's a healthy tension between always wanting more and getting better, but being able to celebrate the moment. And if you can balance that really, really well, right, it'll get you from great to elite. And it doesn't mean it's always going to remain that way. So consistency, hearing and learning from you has been so priceless. And so many other lessons. But Doc, I'll turn it back to you because I could ask questions to Annie all day long.
Well, I just love that extra reps only if I'm nice to myself.
I'm using that, by the way.
Right, as we kind of put a wrap on confidence, right? Those 6 ingredients, wringing out that towel is preparation. Everything physically, mentally, technically, and tactically, right? We're halfway home to confidence. And then she kind of mentioned the second ingredient there, self-talk. And when we're not nice to ourselves and it's not productive, then we're only adding to the stress, right? And so if we're going to take those extra reps, we also have to be, and I think playing big and fearless are ways of having positive self-talk. I can remind myself to smile or play big. That is a form of self-talk rather than what's wrong with me? I could have done that 2 years ago. The next point, I just got to play big. Then of course we talked about that third ingredient, what teammates and coaches could do to help you, especially teammates. Past success, I think that, you get your confidence from, obviously, like you said, I could do it when it matters most. So you always knew it. On the bench, off the bench, I can come in and play great. And then, the role of family and friends, they're big supporters of you, both Tanner, your family, they can either help or hurt you. And then spirituality. So it's not a surprise that Annie was able to navigate confidence at a high level, even though, as she pointed out, it's not always perfect and it doesn't have to be. And it's never going to be. But we can get it back as quickly as we lose it when we work on those ingredients in different parts. So my kind of last question, in a sense, is, all right, you said it out loud. Probably my journey's over with the national team. You didn't say it 100% was, but probably is. Obviously, you're a gold medal winner, and you were one of the most successful players on that team in the gold medal run. You were one of the stars of this team's run to the silver medal. I pointed out, I don't think you even knew this when I let you know that. Like, you set a record in the history of the United States all time of having the most points ever of an individual athlete. Not that individual accolades mean that much, but it points out that you had a pretty successful USA career here in 2 Olympics. Can you sort of put into words, sort of as you reflect back now, like you haven't thought about it a lot, but like not so much the gold medal, we've kind of hit on that, but like this last journey as you left Paris, one, was that rag completely dry? And 2, what did it mean to you to sort of, do everything you could to be in the best position you could be to max out when you walked out that door from Paris and back to America?
Yeah. The rag was dry, I feel. And I just was really immensely proud and grateful of the way our team just really screwed the wheels on in the nick of time. I mean, some of it's honestly some timing and luck and God's hand on that whole process. But I just think the more tired we got, the Olympics is a long tournament. Like you're there for like a month, you're sleeping on cardboard beds, you have roommates. Like I'm 30 years old. I'm like, what am I doing with a like I haven't had a roommate besides my husband in years. So I don't know. It's like a tiring environment in and of its own. And I was just proud of the way that even as we got tired or maybe sick at times or worn out, just with the demands of a month on the road, we just kept leaning in. So I feel like the towel was definitely wrung out. Was there a second part to your question?
I don't know if you're proud of yourself. Now you keep going back to your team, which is awesome. We wouldn't expect less from you, but you're putting a wrap on your 8 years national team. I want to know what you thought of your own journey. Just you, what you think of your.
See, and this is where the high achiever it comes out because I'm like, my first thought is, oh, but you could have done so much differently, like that's just how you are when you care about something and you want it to be successful. But I am really proud of a lot of things that I've accomplished, I guess. I think I feel like I really came into like who I was while being on this team, like, or who I am. I really found myself. And that's kind of the beautiful thing too of adult sports or professional sports is, we're just a bunch of girls in our 20s and we're figuring out life and who we are together. And a lot of life has been lived. And I feel very sure of who I am. And I think I'm probably most proud of that, like who I was in 2017 to now. I think there's been a lot of really good. It's been like the joy of my life representing our country and traveling the world. And, but there's also a lot of moments. Yeah. You think I would have done that differently, or I wish that didn't sting so bad, but you're like, you know what? It was worth it in the end. And the medals feel heavier, I think, because of that, like just the stories that they carry. And, I feel like for whatever reason, like the mission that God has had me on has been in this volleyball space. And a lot of times I think I was like, what is all this for? And I don't know, but it just, I feel like this is where I'm called to be. And I'm just, proud I had the opportunity that long. And I'm proud of myself. I am.
She said it.
I was going to say she did.
I'm like gritting my teeth. It's like,
proud of
no,
myself. I am.
It's so surreal. Like I think, and this was a lot of our work, Larry, was me just spilling out all of my guts and you being like, but here's like the facts of like who you are and what you've done. But that just like there's a story behind it all, and it's real people doing hard things. And so I just look back on the journey so much more than like the outcomes of it all. And I'm a way tougher person because of it all. And just happy that this is where God's had me the last 8 years, and it's been a fun pursuit.
Last question for me. Of course, I got to meet your husband there. He's fun. I really enjoyed talking to him. But any ideas of what the future holds for you and Tanner here in the next couple of years?
Yeah, Tanner and I just celebrated our 3rd wedding anniversary. But we live in Southern California. He works here full time. We live about 10 minutes from the training facility, so that's what brought us out here. But I am playing for League One volleyball. I'll be playing in Madison, Wisconsin this fall, and he'll be out here. We'll do distance a little bit longer, but Madison, Wisconsin to Orange County is much better than Orange County to Japan or Turkey or wherever in the world we've been. So it'll be a fun transition, and we're excited to see the league grow and take off. And I think right now, like I said, like my calling is to be in this volleyball space and do what I can to authentically lay a brick in whatever's happening in our sport. Because it is, as you guys know, just growing at an exponential rate. And it's really cool. And I think it'll be really fulfilling to be a part of something like that.
Well, I know you're proud of yourself, but I'm personally proud of you because I think you had that choice in that moment. Like you said, one, awareness. Is there anything in that rag I've never squeezed out? And then, like you said, do I even want to do it? Do I want to do that work? It's hard work, and I've been pretty successful without wringing that last piece out. And does that have to be part of my story? And I think that's the journey for a lot of athletes and high performers in all kinds of spaces, to have somebody help them with the awareness piece. And then what do I do about it?
Yeah.
Or do I do anything about it? So that's why I'm proud of you, because then you also shared it to an audience that is really interested in this stuff and is also trying to decide as a coach or an athlete, do I wring that rag out? And do I even know what's still left to wring out in that rag, or what's getting in my way of, like you said, get to the end and have no regrets? So
I think just on that, I think but the one regret I might have would be not doing some of these things sooner, like the mental work, or just, I think of times where I was so bent over, that meeting didn't go how I thought it would, or I sit down and have a talk with our coaches about this, or I feel like I'm in a weird space with this teammate, and I would just let it play in my head. And I wish I would have done it sooner. Not impulsively. Like, I still think there's a lot of good in sitting down at the end of every day and being like, just identifying, like, how did today feel? How did we want it to feel? And like, what's a good way to go about it tomorrow that feels authentic to like the convictions I have as a person. But, when you're on a team with people who all want the same thing, it's usually pretty well received, even if you stumble in doing it or saying it. So, that would be my advice, would just be like, seek guidance or clarity from coaches, or peace with teammates. Like, just seek it sooner, because it's the sooner you can just, put that stuff to the wayside, you can start on the fun stuff. And that's really focusing on how you can optimize the court.
People better listen to the very end of this. They're still getting nuggets and gems right here at the end of this. Best last thoughts at all?
No, Annie, we're taking you with us on the road. You're going to, I'm telling you, it's priceless, because you pause for a moment to share things that you've been learning for years, and you're still learning. And we've earned, thankfully we've earned the opportunity to be able to listen to you. And so I'm very thankful that you chose to be on this podcast episode. And I know you're not done yet. And I know, at least right now, you have a really strong foundation to stand on, and to be proud of what you've done at this moment. And I'm excited what you do in the future.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
By the way, we do take you on the road, because we have at least 3 videos we show at different times, like clips. So she does kind of go on the road, although
she really does. She's in multiple conversations a day. So just so you know,
I like the live version as well. But any last thoughts for you, Annie?
No, I mean, I appreciate this. This has been fun. Like I said, I haven't really taken the time to spill all of these thoughts and reflect on the last year or 4 years or 8 years yet. I'm still kind of in celebration mode and relaxation mode, but it's been fun. And Sue, our team consultant, talks about artifacts of your career, and I don't know, I just think of this podcast and it's like, what a fun way I can come back and revisit like what this felt like in real time. And as it's all fresh, it's been fun to deep dive a bit. So thank you for having me.
Physical abilities such as strength, speed, agility, endurance, and coordination are fundamental in sports. But mental abilities such as focus, concentration, motivation, confidence, resilience, and decision-making can heavily influence an athlete's performance, especially when it matters the most. If you want the mental edge in sport and life, check out the Max Out Mindset for Volleyball book and workbook, or the Max Out Mindset for Softball book and workbook. A guide for coaches, athletes, teams, and parents to help you be in the best position to max out when it matters the most. Go to www.maxoutmindset.com.
You are listening to Max Out Mindset with your host, Dr. Larry Widman, performance psychiatrist and elite mindset coach to women in sports, business, and life.